So I have a crack theory about Sandrone. She might be part witch. Kind of. People have been calling Sandrone the Herter XP, as in Herter from Honkai Star Rail. I will be talking about elements of Herter in relation to Sandrone, so if that's a spoiler for you, and if you're planning on playing HSR, probably best to click away now. Though I don't expect to be talking about anything too in-depth regarding her. So, looking at the Herta splash art, she does feel very Narcissus-esque. We have the picture frames, which evoke a similar feeling to the looking glass mechanic in Fontaine. The clock components as well remind me of the Doomsday Clock in the Narcissus Tower. The keyhole makes me think of the keyholes you can find at the back of the Catherine robots. And perhaps the key is similar to the wind-up mechanism on the back of Sandrone. But elements of Herta's design always bothered me when thinking of her as a Sandrone XP. For one, she's purple, and most importantly, she has a witch hat. I know XPs don't have to be 100% similar to each other, but we do have witches in Genshin, so I had to know, does Sandrone have some sort of connection to a witch? Comparing Sandrone and Herta again, Sandrone seems to have more in common with the 4-star puppet Herta, not the Herta, the real one that controls the Herta puppets. See, both Sandrone and 4-star Herta are puppets, and thinking about it this way, it might start to make some sense. Because the Herta controls the 4-star puppet Herta. And if Sandrone is the same as the 4-star puppet Herta, perhaps the equivalent to the Herta in Genshin is Sandrone's soul. See, Sandrone appears to be a puppet most likely created by Elaine Guillotine in the image of his dead sister. That would explain her puppet body and her resemblance to Mary-Ann. But what about Sandrone's consciousness, her soul? Who occupies the puppet body? Some people think Sandrone is Elaine, who somehow transferred himself into the puppet. While I still like this theory, and I would be pretty satisfied with this if this was the case, I have come across another possibility that I find really interesting. You see, Jacob, in order to try and recreate Renee's body as Narcissus, had to use Elaine's pocket watch to do it. Quote, "I'll use the pocket watch Elaine gave me as the cornerstone to construct Renee's form. I've never dared part with it, as it represents all the time Renee and I had shared. An item like this, a cornerstone, was necessary. Perhaps because items hold memories, just like all the items Mavuika had to burn for their memories in the Natlan Archon quest. Maybe you need that person's own memories or another person's memory of that person. That does seem to be how it worked with Conria. Daneslip's memories and the memory of his homeland was used to recreate that very same homeland, or at least a version of it. It seems to work like a blueprint. This also kind of reminds me of what happened in Venti's story quest. Stanley's soul was supposed to be lost in the Mare Javari, but somehow Hans was able to return the soul to Venti. The way I interpreted this is that Hans carried the memory of his friend, and that was basically equivalent to his soul. But to me, this seems like an imperfect method, because memories can be distorted, merged, and changed. Perhaps this could be one of the reasons why Narcissus never considered himself to be Renee. Elaine seemed to be interested in robotics and machinery, but whether he would be able to create something like a soul with robotics alone, well, that's to be seen. I cannot help but wonder if he had to borrow parts of Renee's research to give Sandrone a soul. Giving her a soul would make her more similar to Mary-Ann, after all. As for why all of this might point to Sandrone's soul being at least part witch, well, to start, let me acquaint you with the blue-eyed witch, Josephine. The Blue-Eyed Witch was a historical figure from Mondstadt's aristocratic age, and In this video, I'll just be calling her Josephine, since that might have been her name. Josephine seems to have been, at least at one point in time, either a commoner or a gladiator, or someone of equal status. I say this because she was also known for wielding a spear. The royal spear description states that in that time period in Mondstadt, swords were considered weapons for the nobility, and that bows and spears were left for the commoners and the gladiators. Parsifal was a Robin Hood-esque type of figure, and an heir to an aristocratic family. He fell in love with Josephine and gifted her a sapphire, which he had pried out of a goblet he stole. Josephine's master would later find her in possession of the stolen sapphire, and Josephine would be punished by having her face branded with the mark of a criminal. Josephine's branding would, understandably, cause a rift between Parsifal and Josephine, and their story does not have the happiest of endings. Eberhard, Parsifal's brother, would betray him, causing Parsifal to be exiled. Eberhard would also become the disciple to Josephine, learning from her how to wield a spear, and then later killing Josephine for reasons unknown. Heart's Desire tells the story of an antique shop that sells people their Heart's Desire. In Volume 3, named Sapphire, both Josephine and Parsifal make an appearance. Parsifal wants to purchase a potion that will allow him to forget Josephine, but at least on this occasion he doesn't get the potion because it was sold to another customer. Josephine visits later and she wants to trade away the sapphire, and the book implies that someone had exposed Josephine's weakness. Apparently Josephine had the ability to see people's weaknesses, and the Heart's Desire also references the story of a witch who could see death, but who herself died of a broken heart, which seems to be a reference to Josephine herself. In that same volume, after the shopkeeper peers into the sapphire, it says, "Legends claim that peering into a pure gemstone at a specific time can reveal the past, the future, and even someone's true nature." Almost like the sapphire held Josephine's past, present, and future, her memories, maybe. In the next volume of Heart's Desire, the shopkeeper deals with a different pair of customers that were also trading a crystal. The shopkeeper remarks, "Core lapis is the soul of the rocks. Even the hardest and most resilient of rocks will, over time, eventually produce a pure, limpid soul. Legends claim that core lapis is the soul of the rocks of the earth, and that the stronger the life force of the rock, the more power it possesses to reveal a person's true nature. Some say that even after its owner has left the world, core lapis will bring their unfulfilled desire and regret back into it, waiting for the one with the ability to fulfill them." If you remember in Zhongli's second story quest, we were told that rocks can hold memories. Some can apparently hold memories better than others, but perhaps just as the shopkeeper said, it's just a matter of time. So if all this is true, is it possible that the sapphire that belonged to Josephine held her memories, and in time developed its own soul? So Josephine gives away the sapphire in order to protect or get rid of her weakness, maybe, which is interesting because this feels similar to the 11th Lord and Anefa. Anefa was the 11th Lord's malfunction that they wanted to dispose of, and Anefa would later come to inhabit a humanoid robot. Sapphires come in many different shades of blue, and some of those shades are violet blues. Sapphires can even be purple. Heck, apparently rubies and sapphires are technically the same thing, just in different colors. So rubies can be called red sapphires. I find this interesting since Sandrone also has red gems on her outfit. Did you know that there was a Fontanian called Coppelius who wrote a story about Josephine and Parsifal? And then pre-Cataclysm, a magician duo would base their stage names off of the characters in his story. This is the great magician Parsifal and her assistant Josephine. And since they are also magician and assistant, they mirror Lenny and Lynette. So Josephine's criminal brand is interesting because it was on her face, right? And both Lenny and Lynette do have tattoos or marks of some kind on their faces. Lenny's is a tear, which apparently means that he has killed someone. so technically it is also the mark of a criminal. Lynette's tattoo seems innocent as it's a star, but I did read up on a mafia organization called La Stida in Sicily that is known for using star tattoos to identify members. But typically they put it between the thumb and index finger on the right hand. The name Stida also means star in Italian, and from what I recall, Fontaine does have Italian inspirations. But whether or not it's the mark of a criminal, Lynette also has a mark on her face. Anyway, do you remember Lynette's fun little quirk? The one where she says stuff like entering chat mode or entering standby mode and, generally acts like a puppet? Even one of the quests in her hangout just straight up calls her a robo-girl. Lynette also uses Capellia's Artifice spare clockwork components as ascension materials. Those are the boss drops from the Dirge of Capellia, one of the modes of the Icewind suit. These two robots were inspired by a play called Clockwork Capellia, which was written by the same person who wrote the story based on Josephine and Parsifal. This play, Clockwork Capellia, seems to be based on the real-life ballet of a similar name, Capellia. Genshin's version doesn't seem to be exactly the same as its real-life counterpart, but two of the main characters, Capellius and Capellia, are the same, an inventor and his puppet, who he would try and bring to life by giving her a soul. Though Genshin's version only mentions that the puppet has a human heart. It could just be a coincidence, sure, but I have reason to believe that Lyney and Lynette may represent parts of Sandrone's soul, or at least the main parts of her soul. I say this because I believe that Sandrone's soul may be made up of memories from different people. And most of these memories might come from Mary-Ann and the witch named Josephine, represented by Lyney and Lynette respectively. I think a bit of Elaine might be in there too, but I think Elaine might be represented by Sandrone's big robot for the most part, either allegorically or literally. Fermé might also represent Elaine allegorically because both are good with clockwork machinery. Anyway, Mary-Ann seemed to be a bit more outgoing than her brother, and Lyney is definitely the more outgoing one of the three siblings. And if Sandrone's soul has two aspects at least, you could say both aspects are twins in a weird way. And Lyney and Lynette are twins, so that matches. Lyney's outfit also has a lot of red, and I believe red might also be Mary-Ann's color. The dress she is seen in as a child is red, for one, and her consciousness was absorbed by the Oceanid Lyris, who was nicknamed the Red Empress. So technically the version of Mary-Ann that exists now is also the Red Empress. I know the new Mary-Ann is blue, but weirdly this reminds me of how Alice is red, despite the fact that the character Alice from Alice in Wonderland is blue. The Wings of Feasting was also said to be originally blue, but Alice painted them red. So it feels like this might explain our weirdness with colors in this instance. Maybe. So we have somewhat established that there could have been some version of Josephine's soul still present after her death, the sapphire. But how could this sapphire come to be in Elaine's possession? Lynette has cat futures, which is interesting for a few reasons. The Narcissus Kreutz questline had a bunch of references to Alice in Wonderland. Mary-Ann is named after the character of the same name, who is the servant of the White Rabbit. The White Rabbit mistakes Alice for Mary-Ann when he first sees her. Lyris the Oceanid, who absorbs Mary-Ann's consciousness, is said to be called the Red Empress. This is a reference to the Red Queen in the second book, Alice Through the Looking Glass. The Red Queen and the Queen of Hearts are different characters, however they are often confused, and certain adaptations just straight up merged the two into one character. This seems to be the case for Genshin as well, since Lyris, who is nicknamed the Red Empress, was called such because she can dissolve people's wills, or in other words, take their heads. The thing is, at the end of Alice Through the Looking Glass, it turns out that the Red Queen was just Alice's cat. In the Savior's Wake quest, you can find a note referencing this. Quote, "The Red Queen, in the end, it was all her dream, and she was a little mother cat." In Simulonka, we also get a bit more cat lore with Karara's alternate outfit, Phantom in Boots. In that outfit's description, it says, and I quote, "Amongst the multitude of creatures, the cat was favored of the goddess, such that she even tried to create a realm just for them within Simulonka." The goddess here is most likely Anders' daughter, who is a witch. To continue, a feline heroine appears in the corner of the draft manuscript and, while the goddess was distracted, escapes between the margins. She stole wrath, tears, and sorrowful sighs from other pages in the manuscript, and she distributed them in every street throughout the country of cats. No wonder then that you could find no trace of this gallant cat, for that rebellious figure never slipped out from the paper folds, but could only exist in the world's blueprint memory. So it seems that, at least in Simulonka, a storybook based on Tevat, there is a cat that was able to move between the pages of the manuscript, and this feels very similar to how the witches of the Hexenzirkel seem to be immune to changes in Irminsul. Witches also tend to take cats as their familiars in many stories, so perhaps in Genshin, cats are an allegory for witches. And Josephine was apparently a witch. And if cats are allegories for witches, then Josephine is allegorically a cat. The thing is, Lynette's cat futures are said to be a throwback to her ancestors. In Character Story 5, it says, quote, "It is said that these cat-like futures are inherited, but that even as such a bloodline grows thin across generations, instances of atavism can still occur from time to time." Atavism referring to the reoccurrence of ancestral traits. Then perhaps just as Lynette's cat futures are an ancestral throwback, then maybe in a similar way, something about Sandrone was also given to her by an ancestor. Perhaps a soul from Josephine's sapphire, a soul for a witch, or a soul of a cat. Interestingly enough, Herta, the 4-star version from HSR, also spawns a huge gem that she uses to crush her enemies. That gem also has 2 pointy things on it, like cat ears, and if gems are souls, then you could say that Herta too is in possession of a cat soul. Herta also has something that looks like purple Cecilias in her design. But that would mean that perhaps Mary-Ann or Elaine were possibly descended from Josephine. Elaine and Mary-Ann were orphans, and it's hard to say what their lineage was. Back in Lynette's hangout event, we got to be detectives in a drug smuggling case. It turns out that the mastermind of the operation is a lady named Elodie, who was a survivor of the Lefevere family. The Lefevere family was once a prestigious noble family in Fontaine, and its head was the one who tried to kidnap Lynette when she was a kid. The Lefevere family is interesting because they do parallel the Lawrence clan of Mondstadt to some extent. Both were prominent noble families, and both were up to no good, to put it lightly, and both families fell from grace. Both even start with the same letter, L, and have 8 letters, but that could just be a coincidence. Lynette was a victim of the Lefevere family, and Josephine was also a victim of a noble family, possibly the Lawrence clan. It does seem that the sapphire was stolen from the Lawrence clan, since in Heart's Desire it is said that the gem had the crest of the ruling family. That would have been the Lawrence clan, since, they were ruling Mondstadt at the time. I think there is also a good chance that Parsifal was from the Lawrence clan, which would be funny, because if he just stole from his own house. I say this because in the description of the royal spear, it says that it belonged to a noble from that time period, who wanted to learn spearmanship to gain some sort of advantage. This would match with what we know of Eberhard, Parsifal's brother, who was learning spearmanship from Josephine. The whole reason Eberhard betrayed his brother Parsifal in the first place was because he himself was an illegitimate child and he wanted to eliminate the competition. So both Eberhard and the man in the spear's description are ambitious types. Now, if the noble in this weapon's description is indeed Eberhard, then it's likely he was from the Lawrence clan. We know the crest of the Lawrence clan is the glacial seal. It's shown on Eula's name card since she herself is a Lawrence. The royal spear, as well as other weapons in that very same weapon series, have that very same crest on it. Well, it's actually slightly different from the one Eula has in her name card, but the version on the spear seems to be a version used during the age of Mondstadt aristocracy, and the royal spear still specifies that it was a house crest that was put on the spear, so the symbol of a family. You can also see this other variant of the crest on Eula's outfit. So if Eberhard was from the Lawrence clan, then his brother Parsifal had to be a Lawrence too. Interestingly enough, in Eula's character story, it states, besides traditional etiquette, art is the second most highly prized asset to the aristocrats, known as the second soul. The dance of sacrifice, a ritual used by illustrious families to display their nobility, is thought of as the crystallized form of the soul, the prized gem in the ruler's scepter. I do wonder if Josephine might have been a Lawrence as well. I say this because since the story of Josephine and Parsifal is a fairly ancient one, there's a good chance some of the historical retellings are inaccurate. In Lynette's hangout, Elodie Lefevere was a survivor who was in hiding, and apparently the Lefeveres often trained some of their lineage to go undercover for whatever reason. If the Lawrence clan also had similar practices, since they parallel the Lefevere family, maybe they also had their own undercover agents. So I wonder if Josephine could have been an undercover agent, and since many people didn't realize her and Parsifal were siblings, they assumed they were lovers. But that's just a speculation. I think for the purposes of this video, we'll just assume they were indeed lovers, because entertaining every single possibility would take too long. Moving on. I think it's likely that some members of the Lawrence clan might have left Mondstadt, especially after their fall, just like how members of the Lefevere family decided to go into hiding. It definitely might have been the better choice. Eula, who is from the Lawrence clan, faced such discrimination for being a Lawrence that she apparently had to hunt to feed herself, because no one would sell her food. And this is in modern day Mondstadt. It would have been way worse right after the fall of the Lawrence clan. Fontanians could still have offspring with people from other nations, even when they were still technically Oceanids, I think. Because Kave's mom apparently settled down with a man from Fontaine and had a family, so it must have been possible. So I think it's also possible that maybe Elaine or Mary-Ann were descendants from the Lawrence clan. And if one of the two were a Lawrence, maybe one of them could have been in possession of Josephine's sapphire. Of course, this could conflict with the tale told in Heart's Desire, where it is mentioned that Josephine gave away the sapphire. But the shop specialized in giving people their heart's desire, so if this shop does exist, then there's a possibility that they would trade the sapphire to someone who greatly desires it. If Parsifal didn't die at sea, he might have wanted it, and if not him, maybe Eberhard, his brother. Here's the thing. Eberhard was Josephine's disciple and was the one to kill her. We don't really know why he killed her, but I wonder if Eberhard took a page out of Josephine's book, since he was her disciple. Just like how Josephine gave away her sapphire to get rid of her weakness, possibly, then Eberhard might have also killed Josephine because she was also his weakness. Maybe because he loved her. So Eberhard could have also desired the sapphire as well. In the storybook notes, it said that the Red Queen was not just a cat, but a mother cat. In Alice Through the Looking Glass, Alice actually had 3 cats, one the mother to the other 2 who were kittens. However, it is one of the kittens that turn out to be the Red Queen, not the mother cat. So for Genshin to specifically call the Red Queen a mother cat, I wonder if this is true for the cat Josephine. See, there are theories that Child is related to Mondstadt Parsifal in some way. Based off of the TCG card, Child does seem to resemble him, and Child also uses Mondstadt books as talent materials. Child has very blue eyes, and Josephine was also said to have sapphire blue eyes. So I wonder if Josephine and Parsifal had a child. In one of the variations of the Arthurian legend, Parsifal did have children, 2 of which were twins. So maybe Parsifal in Genshin didn't even know of these children. I mean, him and Josephine weren't on the best terms. If this is true, we could have 2 lines of descendants from the Lawrence clan. Tartaglia's family descended from Parsifal and Josephine, who would have migrated to Snezhnaya at some point, and Mary-Ann or Elaine's family line perhaps descended from Eberhard that ended up in Fontaine. Speaking of Snezhnaya, one of the witches of the Hexenzirkel, Ivanovna, was apparently the first mayor of Snezhnaya, and is given the initial J in the Hexenzirkel despite the fact that her name is Ivanovna. J would also be Josephine's initial, so perhaps Ivanovna was also descended from Josephine, which could make her child's ancestor, if he is indeed descended from Josephine. And since we are already talking about ancestry here, all the stuff about love stories reminded me of Decarabian, the god of storms, and his human lover Amos. You see, the symbol of the Lawrence clan, or at least the version of it used in Mondstadt aristocracy, can be found on the weapon materials for Decarabian's tower. It makes me wonder if this symbol has anything to do with Decarabian himself. In Amos's bow, it says that the huntress thought herself loved by the slave master. The Lawrence clan did have slaves, and Josephine was known to hunt the Vile. I'm not saying Josephine is Amos, but they also appear to mirror each other. Amos was also said to be a huntress, which is interesting because the Lawrence clan might have lived outside of Mondstadt, if the description of the sacrificial bow is anything to go by. The sacrificial bow is also said to be a ceremonial hunting bow, and apparently the Lawrence clan used it to reenact their clan's brave victory over the frozen wilderness. Which means that during that time period, they might have also been hunters. Eula of current-day Mondstadt also had to hunt for herself since people wouldn't sell her food, so that's interesting. The branding of slaves is also something that was common in real life, and sometimes they would even brand the face, which is similar to how Josephine was branded on her face. Anyway, Decarabian had a barrier erected around Old Mondstadt at the time, so if Amos was a huntress, then it might make sense that she could have originally lived outside the city too. So I wonder if Amos herself was from the Lawrence clan. But that's another rabbit hole entirely. I feel like I'm just seeing Lawrence everywhere. Going back to Clockwork Capellia for a second. The original manuscript of Clockwork Capellia was destroyed because the day of the play's first show just happened to be the same day that the Cataclysm happened. It seems that the manuscript was destroyed and there weren't many survivors either. Did you know that the Hotel de Boer used to be a theater? Presumably this was the very place that the Clockwork Capellia was performed the day of the Cataclysm. During the Cataclysm, the building was destroyed, and nowadays it has become the Hotel de Boer. Lenny and Lynette apparently perform there some nights, and funnily enough, you can find another pair of twins in this hotel, Leon and Argalia. They are almost identical, except apparently the way they talk is very different from each other. They are also dressed in something similar to a maid outfit, which is interesting since Josephine was said to have had a master that she was punished by. Mary-Ann in Alice in Wonderland was also the servant of the White Rabbit. Parsifal also mirrors Robin Hood since he stole from the rich and gave to the poor. And did you know that Robin Hood's lover is called Maid Mary-Ann? The twin sisters dress very similarly to Mondstadt maids. They might even be wearing Mondstadt clothes specifically. You can find a woman in Liyue that dresses up in a Mondstadt maid uniform because her master wants her to, for some reason. And this dress is the same one worn by the maids at the Dorn Winery. However, it is not the same dress as the ones the twins wear. The ones the twins wear is the same dress Sarah from Good Hunter wears. Sarah isn't really a maid, but she serves people food like the twins do at the Hotel de Boer. It could just be a case of reused assets, but I find this interesting since they work in the building where Clockwork Coppelia was performed all those years ago. They are also twins like Linny and Lynette, who could represent twin aspects of Sandrone's soul. Maybe a key difference between these different aspects of Sandrone is also the way she speaks, which reminds me of Layla and other Layla. Perhaps these different aspects even manifest themselves as different identities within Sandrone. Argalia also says something interesting when you ask her about the tableware. She says that she normally puts the tableware out to dry outside and that Lynette almost had an accident one time. She says it would be awful if Lynette's face was injured. Face injury, like how Josephine was branded on the face, maybe. And since Lynette mirrors Josephine, this does feel very intentional to me, but I could be just going crazy at this point. So, let's piece this together. If Josephine's sapphire was an heirloom, for either Mary-Ann or Elaine, it would have ended up containing many memories pertaining to them, which would have made it a perfect candidate to be used to create a soul or be used in the place of a soul. What makes it a perfect candidate is the fact that Josephine's sapphire might have contained all of her memories, and perhaps any of the memories of anyone who came into contact with it. Do you remember Chizuru, the yokai from the Mikawa Flower Festival? She was a pair of her goiter used to play games that eventually gained sentience, so an object that gained a consciousness. She was apparently only able to do so due to Kamaya's strong yokai energy, though. It feels like a similar scenario. The soul in the sapphire may not be a perfect copy of Josephine or Mary-Ann or Elaine or anyone. It would be a mix of all the memories it came into contact with. It would have witnessed everything that happened between Josephine and Parsifal and Mary-Ann and Elaine. So I want to revisit this whole idea of Linny and Lynette mirroring Mary-Ann and Josephine respectively. See, Lynette only pretends to be a puppet. She isn't actually one as far as we know. Lynette is also part cat, and she even has a teacup in her idol, which makes her feel very witch-like. So that's why I think Lynette is a mirror to Josephine herself. As established, I think Linny represents Mary-Ann and also represents Parsifal too. Parsifal and Josephine were apparently lovers, but I think the key idea is that they were soulmates, so an inseparable duo, like twins, and perhaps like two parts of one soul. And if red represents the Mary-Ann aspect, or the Mary-Ann identity, and blue the Josephine aspect, then you'd have red and blue. Combine these colors and you would get purple. In the play The Lost Puppet, the one in Lynette's hangout, the true ending of the play was one where the puppet girl loses all her companions and realizes then that her companions were the ones she truly wanted to dance for. I cannot help but wonder now if this is foreshadowing for Sandrone, but I was unsure who the companions would be in her case. Perhaps the big robot? The Fatui? Neither seemed right. Then I realized something. See, Lynette was originally playing the main character in the play The Lost Puppet, but she eventually gave the role up to the original actress, also encouraging them to return to the original script. The thing was, this was a masked play. They got the original actress to play the puppet without anyone knowing until the very end, where she removes her mask. At the end, the original actress Gillian remarks that if she never took the mask off, no one would ever know. The mask here is essentially the role of the puppet in the play. Perhaps the main aspect in control of Sandrone is the Josephine aspect, like how Lynette is the actress for the puppet initially. However, she gives the role back to Gillian, which could symbolize Josephine relinquishing control back to a different consciousness, to a different aspect, maybe the Mary-Ann aspect. This again seems similar to what we see with Layla to some extent, since in her last anecdote it seems to be implied she might get therapy for her condition, and maybe other Layla will disappear. And if so, maybe the companion or companions Sandrone loses at the end are the other aspects of her soul. They would have been sharing a body for a while, after all, so maybe they would have some sort of weird companionship. And this brings me back to Herta again, who is purple, because I think she represents the merged form of these aspects into one identity. Perhaps because Sandrone has blue and red and not purple, this means that these identities are fragmented and have yet to merge. So perhaps her losing those different aspects to her soul in the end just means that they will finally merge into one, and perhaps that was the intended script from the beginning. This was a long theory. Who knows if any of this will come true? I am just excited to play Nod-Krai and probably get all my theories proven wrong right out the gate. Maybe all this stuff hint at something else entirely. Maybe I just took things too literally, probably. But even so, I had a fun time researching all of this. I do find it interesting that, if true, Sandrone herself might be considered a Lawrence, since the sapphire originally belonged to the Lawrence family, and heck, if Amos was also Lawrence, maybe the sapphire could have belonged to her at some point even. But the Lawrence family were tyrants that ruled Mondstadt for a time, and in the Nod-Krai trailer, Sandrone does say a lot of stuff that would seem fitting of a tyrannical ruler. About Nod-Krai being the Fatui's dominion and how they were going to rule Nod-Krai essentially. But that also could just be typical villain monologue stuff since she is an antagonist. Also, the Coppelius robot looks somewhat similar to Sandrone's big robot with the hat, so if Coppelius does mirror Elaine, then maybe Elaine is inside of the big robot. Either that or the big robot fulfills Elaine's role allegorically. Elaine cared for Mary-Ann, and perhaps Sandrone and the big robot also care about each other, whether or not Sandrone would admit it. But anyway, leave a like if you enjoyed. Don't if you didn't. Comment if you have a better theory on all this nonsense or whatever. I hope you at least had a good time, and I hope you're all ready for Nod-Krai. See ya.